The confidence drained from the HOA president's face the instant the detective calmly read each accusation aloud. Mail fraud, attempted extortion, a long pattern of harassment. Just 2 months earlier, she had marched across my front yard carrying a thick binder, demanding that I immediately hand over $80,000 in so-called overdue HOA fees for a neighborhood I had never belonged to. Now, she was the one writing enormous checks to keep her lawyer on retainer. My name is Matthew Clark. I work as an industrial electrician, and I intentionally bought a small fixer-upper located just beyond the edge of Whisperwood Pines because it sat outside the authority of the Homeowners Association. My property deed couldn't be more direct. It plainly states that the land is not governed by the Whisperwood Pines Homeowners Association, nor is it subject to any of its rules or restrictive covenants. That exemption was exactly why I purchased the place. No monthly HOA dues. No unnecessary arguments. No board members trying to dictate how I lived on my own property. Then Susan Vance entered the picture, acting as though she ruled the entire neighborhood. At first, the problem seemed minor. She taped polite-looking reminders to my front door, informing me that HOA dues were $250 every month. I ignored every single notice without a second thought. Then the certified letters began arriving. Each envelope was thicker than the one before it, stuffed with additional penalties, special assessments, administrative fees, and interest that supposedly kept growing every month. By the 6th month, Susan's calculations claimed I owed nearly $80,000, including charges that supposedly dated back to a time before I had even purchased the house. I laughed, tossed the demand into the trash, and assumed the matter was finally over. Instead, she sent 2 collection agents directly to my driveway. That Saturday had started like any ordinary weekend. I was replacing worn weather stripping around my garage door when a white sedan rolled slowly to the curb. 2 men climbed out wearing cheap business suits, both carrying clipboards as though they expected immediate compliance. The taller man spoke first, his voice polished with the confidence of someone used to intimidating people. "Mr. Clark, we're here regarding your overdue balance with the Whisperwood Pines HOA. I calmly set my screwdriver aside before answering. I don't owe the HOA a penny. My property isn't part of the association. The shorter man shuffled dramatically through a stack of paperwork before looking up. Our records indicate you currently owe $80,000 in unpaid dues, accumulated fines, and interest. Then your records are wrong. I replied evenly. This property has never been inside the HOA's boundaries. The 2 exchanged a quick glance. The taller one stepped closer. Mrs. Vance has instructed us to begin evaluating your assets if you refuse to cooperate. I couldn't help laughing. Asset evaluation? So you're planning to stand on my property and estimate what my pickup truck is worth. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Maybe I should call the real police instead, and we could discuss trespassing while you're here. They hurried back into their car far faster than they had approached. As the sedan disappeared down the street, I realized something important. This situation had moved well beyond an annoying HOA dispute. Susan Vance had crossed into territory that looked increasingly illegal. The following week brought one headache after another. Susan showed up at my house 3 different times, and each visit was more theatrical than the last. During the first visit, she wore what she clearly considered her power suit, a dated blazer paired with a folder thick enough to serve as a weapon. "Mr. Clark," she announced with forced politeness, "I'm simply trying to help you. Pay what's owed now, and we can avoid making this much more difficult." "Susan," I answered with matching sweetness, "I've already shown you my deed. I've also shown you the official plat map. My property line is 20 feet beyond your HOA boundary." Her smile immediately tightened. "Everyone living around here contributes. You're not going to be the exception." "Actually," I replied, "according to the recorded property documents, I am exactly the exception. My lot is specifically excluded from your association." She let out an irritated breath, spun around, and marched away, her heels striking the concrete with sharp, angry clicks. Even then, I knew she wasn't finished. Sure enough, her second visit came with backup. She returned alongside 2 HOA board members, Arthur Sterling and Barbara Hayes, who stood silently behind her while she proudly waved another thick stack of paperwork. These are our governing bylaws, she declared triumphantly. They clearly apply to every property located within a half-mile of the neighborhood. I opened the door only a few inches. Those bylaws cannot override recorded property law. I finished. Susan, my deed was recorded nearly 15 years before your HOA even came into existence. Arthur stepped forward, trying to look intimidating despite his smaller frame. We have attorneys representing the association, he warned. That's wonderful. I replied without changing my expression. So do I? The third visit perfectly captured who Susan really was. She arrived alone at exactly 7 o'clock on a weekday morning, pounding on my front door like a sheriff delivering an arrest warrant. When I answered, still wearing my robe with a fresh mug of coffee in my hand, she looked furious. So you think you're smarter than everyone else? She snapped. I've been running this HOA for 12 years. I know every loophole that exists. Apparently not the one involving accurate property boundaries. I answered before taking another slow sip of coffee. Her face immediately turned bright red. You'll pay every cent you owe, she shouted, along with every additional penalty I'm adding because of your refusal to cooperate. Susan, I replied calmly, the only money I'll be spending is on a restraining order if you keep showing up at my house. She spun around and stormed toward the sidewalk. Before climbing into her vehicle, she turned back and yelled loudly enough for half the neighborhood to hear. This isn't over yet. She was right. The problem was that the ending wouldn't go the way she expected. Susan made the biggest mistake of the entire dispute when she filed a lien against my property with the county recorder's office. On the paperwork, she signed under penalty of perjury that I was a member of the HOA who owed substantial unpaid assessments. The following morning, I drove directly to the county clerk's office carrying my property deed, the official subdivision plat, and a recorded amendment from 2003 that clearly excluded my parcel from the homeowners association. The clerk studied the documents for several moments before her expression noticeably changed. Without saying much, she picked up the phone and asked a detective from the sheriff's department to come to the front counter. Detective Henderson arrived a few minutes later. She was a practical woman in her 40s with a habit of examining paperwork, as though every page might contain the key piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. She carefully spread my documents across the counter before pulling up Susan's lien filing on her computer. After reading it closely, she looked back at me. She signed this under oath, the detective observed. According to this filing, she's acting as the HOA's authorized representative and certifies that she's fully aware of the legal status of this property. Exactly, I answered. That's the problem. She already knows the truth. She knows my property has never belonged to the HOA. Detective Henderson raised an eyebrow. Can you prove that she knew? I smiled. I've been documenting everything. From my briefcase, I removed the binder I had spent months putting together. Inside were printed emails, saved voicemail transcripts, copies of every letter Susan had sent me, and most importantly, testimony from a boundary lawsuit back in 2010. During that earlier case, Susan herself had testified under oath about which properties were excluded from the homeowners association. My address was specifically listed among those exempt parcels. As Detective Henderson read through the transcript, her expression shifted from professional curiosity to unmistakable concern. This is serious, she said quietly. If she knowingly filed a false legal instrument with the county recorder, that's considered a felony in this state. That's only one of several possible violations, I replied. The detective slowly nodded. I'm going to need copies of every document you brought. I came prepared. I slid a thick envelope across the counter. She accepted it, then looked directly at me. So what happens now? I asked. Now, she answered while organizing the documents into a neat stack. I'm going to have a conversation with Mrs. Vance. Susan was brought in for a formal interview later that same afternoon. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. She insisted that every property carrying a Whisperwood Pines mailing address automatically belonged to the HOA, even if the official county records place it outside the association's legal boundaries. Detective Henderson listened without interrupting. Then she quietly slid the transcript from the 2010 boundary lawsuit across the interview table. It was the very testimony where Susan herself had sworn under oath. under oath that my specific property had always been permanently excluded from the HOA. That single piece of evidence changed everything. What Susan had insisted was nothing more than a harmless civil disagreement instantly became clear: documented criminal fraud. I wasn't present during the interview, but Detective Henderson called me later that evening. She sounded as though she could barely contain her satisfaction. "She came in swinging," Henderson said. "She insisted you were just another homeowner trying to avoid paying what you owed." "Then what happened?" I asked. "We placed her own sworn testimony from 2010 right in front of her." I waited. She didn't say a word. The detective laughed. After a long silence, she tried claiming she'd forgotten all about that old lawsuit. Henderson couldn't resist another chuckle. "That's a difficult argument to make when you personally mailed someone 47 collection notices over the course of 8 months. I only kept around 30 of those letters." I admitted. "Didn't matter," she replied. "Susan conveniently brought her own complete file because she wanted to prove she'd given you proper notice." I laughed. "So she handed you all the evidence herself?" "Exactly," Henderson answered. "She practically gift-wrapped her own harassment case." The next several weeks moved quickly. Early on a cool Thursday morning, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into Susan's driveway and arrested her right on her front lawn. Half the cul-de-sac happened to be outside walking dogs at the exact same time. The timing couldn't have been worse for her. Arthur Sterling later told me she never stopped shouting, "This is all a misunderstanding," she kept insisting while the deputies placed her in handcuffs. Her bail hearing took place the following day. I didn't bother attending. The local newspaper did. The front page headline read, "HOA President Charged with Fraud Over False $80,000 Lien." My attorney, Jessica Bennett, was almost enjoying herself. "In 30 years of practicing law," she told me, "I've never represented a case where the defendant documented her own crimes this thoroughly." She flipped through another stack of evidence. Every certified letter, every voicemail, every HOA meeting minute showing they knowingly pursued collections against the Clark property despite documented boundary issues. I smiled. That's certainly one way of describing the fact that my property wasn't part of the HOA at all. Instead of me writing Susan an $80,000 check, she found herself facing felony charges. Even better, the fraudulent lien disappeared from my property title only 6 days later. Once it was resolved, I filed a civil lawsuit against her for harassment, slander of title, and emotional distress. The criminal trial lasted several days. The prosecutor stacked box after box of evidence before the jury. Ironically, most of it consisted of Susan's own records. Addressing the jurors, he said, "The defendant has known since at least 2010 that Mr. Clark's property has never belonged to the Whisperwood Pines Homeowners Association." He paused before continuing. "She testified to that fact under oath in open court. Despite that knowledge, she carried out an 8-month campaign involving threats, fake collection agents, and ultimately a fraudulent lien in an effort to extort $80,000. Susan no longer wore the confident power blazer that had become her trademark. Instead, she sat quietly in a plain gray cardigan, repeatedly shaking her head as though the overwhelming evidence had somehow appeared by mistake. When it was my turn to testify, I kept everything simple. I bought this house because it wasn't inside the HOA. I showed Susan my deed multiple times. I explained the property records over and over. Even after seeing the proof, she continued threatening to take my home. The jury deliberated for only 97 minutes. Then they returned. Guilty, every single count. Mail fraud, attempted extortion, felony harassment. When the foreperson read the verdict aloud, Susan's jaw literally dropped. She stared across the courtroom at me as though I had personally betrayed her. The civil lawsuit never even reached trial. Her homeowner's insurance company agreed to cover part of my settlement before immediately canceling her policy. The remaining amount came directly out of her personal savings. She had tried to collect $80,000 from me. Instead, she ended up paying me $50,000. The final twist came during the HOA's emergency meeting to remove her as president. Naturally, I wasn't invited. After all, I still wasn't an HOA member. Arthur called me afterward, laughing so hard he could barely finish the story. Susan actually showed up and argued she had only been protecting property values. What happened then? I asked. Someone in the back yelled, "By going to prison?" The room erupted. When the votes were counted, every board member voted to remove her. Well, everyone except Susan. She voted against her own removal out of pure spite. 3 weeks later, the judge handed down her sentence. Clearly frustrated by Susan's complete refusal to accept responsibility, he imposed 18 months in federal prison for the mail fraud conviction, followed by 3 years of supervised release and $30,000 in fines. The moment the judge struck the gavel, Susan's expression went completely blank. Her attorney actually had to grab her arm because she stood there mumbling the same words over and over. He owed the money. He owed the money. The deputies led her away in handcuffs. Some people simply refuse to learn. As for me, these days I mow my lawn in peace, still outside the HOA, still enjoying every bit of the freedom that convinced me to buy the property in the first place. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to HOA Conflicts for more unbelievable neighborhood battles.